Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the Camera Raw interface for 2024. This video is part of my Photoshop Essentials series, which is also included in my new course where we put together this stunning composite that you see here from start to finish using all of the latest and greatest tools in Photoshop. If you're interested in learning how to do composites that are magazine or poster quality, check out that new course. I've included a link to it in the description of this video. All right, let's dive into the Camera Raw interface. All right, let's go to File, Open, and in our Assets folder, you're going to see this Camera Raw folder. Go in there, and then let's open up this Coast DNG. Now, a DNG file is a digital negative, and it represents a file that came out of a digital camera. And it has a lot more information than a JPEG or other flat file format. And the advantage of a DNG is, or any raw file, is that you can adjust your temperature, your exposure, and so forth, and get a lot more information out of the photo than what you see right on the screen. Now, when you open a DNG file, it is going to open it in the Camera Raw interface. And the Camera Raw is basically the engine for developing raw photos that is used by both Photoshop, and also it's the same engine used by Lightroom. So if you're familiar with Lightroom, a lot of these controls and features will be familiar to you. So when you first open a DNG file, it will not open in Photoshop. Instead, it's going to open it up in Camera Raw. As you can see here, this is using Camera Raw 16.5. Now, quick orientation on the user interface for Camera Raw. Down here, you have your fit. This basically is just showing you what size your document is, and you can change that here in terms of a percentage. So there, if you wanted to zoom in. Here is your film strip. So if you open more than one file, they'll show up in the film strip here. I'm going to turn that off because we only have one file, so we don't need that. Here you can sort if you have more than one file open, and here you can filter if you have more than one file open. Next, you have your star rating. This just allows you to star rate your images. Again, this is only important if you have more than one file open, and generally your workflow when it comes to using Camera Raw in Photoshop is you're going to be opening one photo at a time, unless you've done a photo shoot or something like that and you're reviewing a whole bunch. Okay, down here is your workflow link. When you click on this, it's going to open up your workflow. And from here, you can determine the color space, the bit depth, and also resize it if you want. You can also determine whether when you open it in Photoshop, it's going to open as a smart object or a flattened layer. We're going to turn this on to open in Photoshop as smart object. Hit OK. Okay, and then on the right here, you have your histogram, which is a visual representation of all the pixels in your image, and on the right are your light colored pixels, on the left are your dark colored pixels. As you can see, this image basically has a whole bunch of white and a whole bunch of really dark, almost black pixels with almost no information in the middle. So that would be the first thing we'd want to fix. Moving down here, you can edit in black and white. You can also auto all your adjustments, and you can HDR, which basically kind of increases the dynamic range of your image, meaning allowing for more information from the highlights and more information from your shadows. Moving down here, you can pick a color profile. Generally, you're going to leave this on Adobe Color, which is the default. Here you have light control, so you can increase your exposure or decrease your exposure. You can adjust your contrast. And here you can also adjust just the highlights. So if we wanted to get more information into our sky, we could move our highlights down. If we want to get more information in the ground here, we could lift up our shadows. And right away you can see our histogram is starting to look better there. Whites adjust just the very kind of end bit of your histogram. So that would control the whites. And then black similarly controls just the very darks. The very dark parts of your image. Next, you have color. This is where you can adjust the temperature, the tint, and also add vibrance and saturation to your image. Next, you have effects. So this is where you can add basically sub-level contrast. So this will make your image more contrasty, but at the texture level of your image. You can also dehaze. That will get rid of any haze in your image. And you can add a vignette to your image, either light or dark vignette. You have additional controls if you drop this little triangle here. You can also add grain, which basically adds film grain to your image. If we zoom in here further, you can see that grain. And you can adjust the size and roughness of your grain as well. Down here under the curve, this is a RGB curve, very similar to the one in Photoshop. The only difference here is you do have this feature, which basically just controls either your shadows, darks, lights, or highlights without making individual points. Now, if you want this to behave just like a Photoshop curve, you would use these here. So this being your RGB curve, and then these being your individual channel curves. You have the color mixer that allows you to mix colors or change individual colors in your file. So here, if we went to the greens, we could make those more yellow or more blue-green. Or we could adjust the saturation if we wanted to take down the saturation of the greens and the yellows. You can see how that affects the image there. Now, pretty much any of these features that you change inside of Camera Raw, if you hold down Option or Alt, you'll get this reset. You can then click on that to reset any changes you've made. Point color works similar to the mixer, but instead of having preset colors, you can choose the color in your file. So if I go here and choose the green, it has now created a point there, and I can change either the hue, the saturation, or the luminance, meaning the light dark of that color that I've chosen. And here I can adjust the range. So how much from that color that I selected will be affected by my changes. Point color is a rather new addition to Camera Raw and also to Lightroom. So if you've been using it for a few years or haven't used it in a few years, this might be a new feature. Okay, next we have color grading. This allows you, works kind of similar to color balance in Photoshop. It allows you to add color into your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights. And you can do those independently, and also you can adjust how much balance there is. Now, I'm not going to do that, so we'll just reset there. And then you have detail. This allows you to add sharpening. You also have a denoise function here that uses AI. Now, if you use this, it will create a new DNG file. You also have manual noise reduction. Moving down from there, you have optics. This allows you to correct distortion created by your camera lens, as well as vignettes created by your camera lens. And pretty much when you select that, it should auto find from the DNG file what camera you used and also what lens you used. However, if it doesn't by default select those, you can come here and find pretty much any camera, any lens, and when you select those, it has presets that already knows what corrections it needs to make. You can also go to manual and correct your distortion and vignette manually. All right, next we have lens blur. This is a new feature in Camera Raw and also in Lightroom. This allows you to apply a lens blur to your image, and this uses AI to some degree. So the results aren't going to be perfect. They're not going to be the same as having a lens blur inside that you took within camera, but that feature is there. And then finally, calibration. This really exists if you're using multiple cameras and each one has a different color space. This allows you to adjust those slight variations in color. I have seen people use this creatively, but honestly, if you're gonna make creative color changes to your image, you should be using color grading, color mixer, or curve. Okay, moving down from the basics panel here, we have the crop and rotate. So this is where you can make adjustments to the rotation of your image, to the crop of your image. You also have this little ruler here. So if I wanted to make sure my horizon line was straight, I could just drag a little line there and it's going to straighten it out for me. I can rotate and flip. I can also make geometry changes to my image. So with this, if I select it, it will basically examine my image and make any transforms necessary to make the line straight. In this, we really just have the horizon line, but in other image, for example, if you take a photo of buildings or architecture, these geometry settings become more important to make sure your lines are straight. I'm going to go ahead and reset all this. Okay, and then moving down from that, we have our remove tool, and this basically allows you to remove elements of your image. You can see that that has removed it. And if I turn off my overlay, I can see what it's done there. And there's a few options here. So the first one is basically like a contextual aware. It uses information from your image to fill that in. As you can see from this, it didn't do a very good job. You can see it looks kind of messy. So let's reset that. And instead of using this, I'm going to turn on use generative AI. I'm going to agree to the rules here and try now, and then paint over this character. And now what it's going to do is use generative AI to fill in what should be here in place of the person. And we're going to get a lot better results. So let's do that. Hit apply. And there you can see. Now, even this, to be fair, is not the best result. We can try the variations, and it looks like this variation is better. Maybe even this variation is better, but all of these have a little bit of a softening. So let's go ahead and reset this. The other tool we can try is the heal tool. Now, what this does is it replaces it with information from somewhere else in the image, but then it adjusts the color of that clone information to better match the area that it's taken from. And if I turn on the overlay, you can actually adjust where it's taking that information from. So if I wanted to add a pull here, I could move this maybe to here and then turn off that overlay and actually get a much better result than I was getting with the generative AI. All right, then the other one is our clone stamp tool, and this basically just lets you copy one to the other. And you can see there the difference between the heal and the clone. If I use clone, it's not color correcting this, and it just looks like a straight clone. If I switch this back to the heal, you can see it's basically color matched my clone information to this spot. So heal is always your best option here. Sometimes generative AI with the remove tool is also a good option. All right. Let's go ahead and reset this for now. Next, you have masks, and masks allow you to do adjustments on a specific portion of your image without affecting the other portions of that image. So for example, if I wanted to just adjust the sky, I could click on this create new mask for sky, select that. As you can see, it's made a mask of my sky, and then I have these controls for adjusting just the sky. So I could maybe make the sky more blue, take the highlights in the sky down, and so forth. So that's what that does. Once you've made a mask, you can subtract or add to it. You can also invert the mask so that it applies everything but that. And obviously you can delete these as well. With the latest versions of Camera Raw, they've really done a lot to make the mask process more versatile, meaning you can do a lot more with masks than you couldn't do a few years ago. We're not going to cover that very much here, but just realize that with masks, you can really drill down and apply very specific changes to just certain parts of your image. And you have some pre-made kind of AI generated mask here, so subject, sky, background, but you can also make entirely your own mask. So with like a linear gradient, I can make a mask that applies just to this area, or I could make a new mask with a brush and brush over the area that I wanted to make a mask for. I can also make a brush that's a radial gradient. So, if I wanted to do a vignette, I could do something like that as well. I'm going to reset this, and then moving down, we have our red eye correction. I feel like this is kind of an obsolete tool. I've never used it personally just because modern cameras don't capture any red eye, but that exists there, and you can use that for both humans and for animals. Next, you have snapshots. So as you're making corrections, you can save a snapshot. Maybe this could be yellow, and then if we make some new adjustments here, let's go to color and try a more blue version of this. Maybe this version's a little bit lighter. We can go back to snapshots, make a new snapshot, call this one blue, and then we can select these and it'll kind of revert all of our settings back to that one. So that's what snapshots do. It allows you to save a snapshot of all your settings and then go back to that if you want to. Next, we have presets. So this, if you've made a bunch of changes, you can save that as a preset, create preset. Also, there's a whole bunch of presets that already exist inside of Photoshop. And if you select one of those, all those settings will be applied to it. So that is something that you can also use. If I go to seasons, winter here, and scan over these, you can see how my image will look with those presets applied to them. Now, all these presets, once you've applied the preset, it's basically changed your settings. So you can go in here and adjust the preset to your liking. Again, I'm going to go ahead and reset everything here. I'm actually going to go to these three dots and reset to open. And let's just adjust this and our highlights. Maybe our contrast a little bit too. Okay, so that is our presets, and there's a whole bunch that come packaged with Photoshop. I believe you can see those here, and you can explore those. Personally, I don't use presets much in Camera Raw, just because when I'm working in Camera Raw, I usually want to create the most neutral version of my photo possible to bring into Photoshop, do my composite, and then apply any creative color grading to it after the fact. All right, finally, we have these three dots. This allows you to basically, this is kind of like your menu for Camera Raw, because the functions up here, as you can see, they're kind of all grayed out. And that's because we're in the Camera Raw workspace. We're not in Photoshop right now. So your menu for Camera Raw, you're going to find here, and this is where you can reset to open, reset to default. You can create a snapshot, create a preset. You can copy your edit selections and paste them onto another image that you have open. You can save your settings and so forth. Okay, and then finally, a few other things here. This allows you to save the image without opening it in Photoshop. And then this opens up your preferences for Camera Raw. Now, by default, it goes to workflow, which is the same as clicking this link down here. Just realize that. You can also get to that through your gear up here. And then down here, you've got your zoom tool, your hand tool, and your color sampler, and also your grid overlay. These are all optional. And then finally down here, you can cancel. Done means it'll apply the changes to your raw file, but it will not open it in Photoshop. And then here you have the option to open your Camera Raw file into Photoshop as a smart object, or if you click on this little drop down, you can open it as a bitmap. So those are all your options in Camera Raw, and that is an overview of the Camera Raw interface and how you can use this tool to enhance your photos. If you enjoyed this tutorial and enjoyed this series, please subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, like and share this video, and leave a comment. And I will see you next time.